theater show. Like I did Broadway across Canada for a while, which was fun. And you're paying 1,500 seat, 1,800 seat theaters. Like it's nothing crazy, right? It's like the Fox in
Yeah.
Detroit. Like
Yeah.
beautiful venue, sounds great, but like you know, it's not that big. So yeah, 40,000 people, open air venue, big. Like you hit a chord and it just like echoes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're just like, wow, this is, and you get a sense of like, okay, don't get out, don't.
This is the Living Numbers Podcast, and I am your host. And this is the place where everyone is interesting. You just have to ask the right questions. Today, I have an amazing musician here, and you all know how we do things here. When I have someone on for the first time, I have to give them an introduction. So, hailing from a small town in Ontario, Canada, that's as close as I could get. He earned his degree in music from Berklee College of Music. He's been a guitarist for 31, 32-ish years. He's toured all across the globe and has been featured in CBS, NBC, Fox News, and USA Today. Those are some hard hitters. He's written 3 books on teaching music that have become Amazon #1 bestsellers. Iron Maiden changed his life after having to relearn guitar due to a terrible car accident. We're glad Nick is still with us today. He believes music should be usable and fun. Music historian, known on the music scene as Samurai Fingers. And he is the creator and founder of the app, website, and YouTube channel, Guitar Dojo. Teacher, storyteller, musician, content creator, I present the Nick Morrison.
Hello, hello. What a wonderful welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
I hope I got at least most of that information right.
Yeah, you did. You did your homework. Yeah, definitely, definitely did.
Sometimes it's hard to find like the exact pieces, so I got to kind of fill in what I don't know.
Sure, totally. No, that's wonderful. I love the bit at the beginning. Small town Ontario, Canada, as good as you could find. Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's wonderful. Place is called Richard's Landing. It's in northern Ontario, and it's very tiny. I think maybe 600 permanent residents. So it's a small
Wow,
place, and it's on an island, so it's very isolated. And actually, the year I was born, 79, they built a bridge connecting to the mainland. So like by the time I was, old enough to do activities and stuff,
wow.
we could drive to other, communities. But before that, like my mom and my dad and my grandparents, to get back and forth, you'd have to wait and take the ferry. And there was one ferry in the
Yeah.
morning and one ferry in the evening, and that was it.
Oh no.
Yeah. So, pretty isolated and very closed off community, but a
To
beautiful
say the
place to grow
least.
up. Yeah. But
So we talked about this a bunch
yeah.
before the show, but our first number here, at least for me, is early 2000s, which is where I was able to kind of control my own music. I think one of the first CDs I bought was G Unit, Beg for Mercy. I think that was one of the first CDs I
Okay.
bought. I was huge G Unit fan. Did you ever listen to rap music or G
Uh,
Unit or 50?
yeah, I did G Unit, not specifically. Um, you know, when the late 90s and early 2000s was really, I think, kind of the almost the golden era, I think, of like rap and hip hop, because it was still experimenting from where it started, in like even
Yes.
the 70s and 80s, right? Like with mixtapes and freestyling over them.
Uh-huh,
Um,
uh-huh.
but you have artists coming up through, through the late 80s and into the 90s. You've got Snoop Dogg, you've got Dr. Dre, you've got and all of the other ones. Your Puff
Yep.
Daddy, Notorious B.I.G., and all the rest of it.
WA, Big Daddy Kane, all those
Yeah.
guys.
And they really started kind of honing it in and going, okay, this is what's going to sell. This is how we market ourselves. And like it turned into a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Yes.
But like that late 90s, early 2000s, things were still, I don't know how to put it, like almost still infant enough where there was
Yes.
some innocence to it. Like there was definitely some stuff that was hard edge for sure, but there was still like this sense of like anything was possible before everything got really, really, really narrowed down. So yeah, there was a
Hmm.
ton of stuff. Like even though rap and hip hop weren't my like favorite genre, there was definitely
Hmm.
artists I would listen to. Like I loved Nelly, who I guess you could
Yeah.
argue one way or the other. Like he wasn't really like a rap artist per se, but I don't think he wasn't. Um, Eminem obviously had a couple huge records at that time, right? A Detroit,
My
uh,
man.
right, native there, and obviously Dr. Dre with the Chronic, and there were a couple big records, like maybe a handful, maybe 6 to 10, like even if you weren't a rap or hip hop guy or gal at that point,
Yes.
like you owned the records because they were just that big.
Hmm.
And I look back at that time and I'm like, well, I was graduating high school, I was going to university, like that was like my formative time. So
Right.
yeah, definitely some good stuff coming out of that era.
And I was talking, uh, man, I think this was Wednesday. I was talking to some friends of mine because I sing at my church, and some artists, they kind of transcend their genre.
Yes.
So like Dr. Dre and Eminem are those kind of guys where even if you don't listen to rap music,
Yep.
and we were specifically talking about Kirk Franklin and early on when he came out with his stuff, where it was like, even if you don't really listen to gospel or you don't even believe in God, you don't even care about who
Yep.
he is, it's like, who is this guy that's making this new kind of music that's kind of cool, it's kind of different, it doesn't really fit. So
Yeah.
some artists just transcend their genres, and I think
Absolutely.
Eminem and some of those guys that you mentioned are some of those guys.
Definitely. And I mean, to the point about gospel, I mean, you look at the massive success that like Luther Vandross had, because he was a gospel guy before he really sort of transformed, but
Yeah.
not that much,
Aretha
into
Franklin,
Aretha
another one.
Absolutely, right? Yeah, yeah,
So it's crazy, not crazy. It's very interesting to see how these genres they overlap and they
yeah.
borrow from others. I think I was listening to you were talking about hard rock and how it came from the blues and how they just kind of took some things out. Can you explain that story? I think I was listening to it on another podcast
Might
from
have been
you.
another podcast, but yeah, I mean, if you look at sort of the history of music of where it came from, if North America is a really new place, right? And we had a whole bunch of things that were happening, obviously, but we've got, let's be completely honest, we got white folks coming over and they're listening to classical music and they're, stuffy and whatever and blah, blah, blah. That's a whole thing. I'm not going to get into it, but like, I mean, like there's that music. And then, there's slaves that come over and they bring music from Africa. And what's really interesting, actually, and this is kind of aside from blues and popular music, but if you look at Cuba and the music of Cuba, and there's like a whole style of genre or a whole genre of music like Afro-Cuban jazz.
Mm-hmm.
So you have this crazy melting pot of Cuba where you have African music meeting like specifically like stuff like from Senegal, so like drumming, and then you've got like Brazilian music, right? You've got the that really pounding dance rhythms coming from Brazil,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and then you also have some Spanish music and some Portuguese, and just everything there sort of mixed and turned into its like own thing, which is super magical. Anyway, getting back to the blues, so if you look at basically the transformative nature of it around the turn of the 19th century, so like late 1800s into
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
1901 1903, we've got something interesting happening where classical music, right, which really, when I say that, is like the stylistic music of 17th century Germany for the most part.
Okay.
um, but it's being transformed into what's going to be this new modern music called jazz, and that's really spearheaded in North America. And they took a lot of the sort of classical idiom and changed it, altered it, added some tensions and things, and it kind of got both more complex and less complex at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But then you've also then got, again, African music coming over, and the oral and song and dance and singing and drumming tradition that came with it. And a lot of
Right.
what was happening, I think, was that the 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 slaves really at that time were taking the music that they were hearing and going, we're going to make it more ours, make it more singable, right?
Yeah.
And stripping away all of the pretense and the nonsense that wasn't necessary, and keeping it to the simpleness of it. And that's really what the blues is if you really listen to it, the chord structure is very, very simple. It's 1, 4, and 5. There's 3 chords, right? And it loops. But the beauty of the music, the depth of the music, comes from the sound of the voice, the emotion that comes from the singer, and then of course the
Right.
stories that are being told.
Yes. Yes.
And so that I think is kind of what really birthed the blues. And then of course you got into the fifth. There's a whole bunch. I'm skipping so much, right? But then of
Right.
course
Right.
you got the
Crash
50s,
course.
right? Where then of course all of a sudden you've got I don't know what you would call it, but like the whitewashing of the blues, right? Where you've got like Sun Records and Elvis Presley coming in, going, well,
That's
this
the
music
first
is good.
name I thought of.
Yeah, like it moves people. People dance. They love it. It's awesome. And now let's package it and sell it.
Right.
And that's really where that music came from and turned into kind of what it is today, right? It's that
Yeah.
very, very stripped down. But if you listen to a lot of what's going on with the blues, it really does come from jazz. And that's why you can take so much jazz influence and put it into blues styles. And you hear that more and more as you get later in the 50s and into the 60s and 70s. And then you can hear those jazz influences also get into other styles of music, because everything kind of is birthed from that super stripped down, let's just sing it like it is and tell our
Right.
stories and connect with people. And
When you
that's
said
why
that, like,
oh sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead.
That's why I always say, like, honestly, the best songs should be able to be sung with like one string on a guitar to play like a bass note and a melody. If you got a good melody and then some sort of a reference for the harmony that's happening behind it, you've got a great song. And if people can hum it, like, that's it. That's all you need. You know, you don't have to be Eddie Van Halen or, you know, whoever to be a good guitar player or to be a good entertainer. You have to have a good voice. You have to have a good story, and really melody is king.
When you talked about the emotion, and right, this is not even like on our list of things to talk about, but when you talked about the emotion behind it, I thought of two people, and I thought of Sam Cooke and Nina Simone.
Yeah.
Where when you hear these people, you're like, oh my gosh, like that I feel like it happened yesterday. Like I can feel what's happening in this song.
Yeah.
And that influences people, that touches the hearts of people, and that's how the music transcends, right? We're talking about Sam Cooke. That music was 60 years ago, but it still resonates today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those are the things. Those are the things that will take you the furthest, right? People will not necessarily remember the things that you say or the things that you do, right? They're not going to remember your words, and they're not necessarily going to remember your actions unless they were so ridiculously heroic or horrendously awful. But by and large, most people, they're not going to remember the words or the deeds. They will remember how you make them feel. Right? And this is not just music. This is like life in general.
Right. So
at least as I've come to understand it.
I mean, that's excellent. I really like that, because you do. When I think about like my Aunt Didi, I always remember how great of a person she was. And it's not anything really like specific, but the feeling of just her warmth and her friendliness to anybody who came across her path. She was just that kind of person. And it's not, like I said, it's not a specific thing. Now I could think of stories, but it's more of a general, this is who this person was and how they made people feel and how they treated people. So man, that's like life lesson. We could just hang it up right there. We could just end it. Thank you guys. This is the Living Numbers Podcast. Nick Morrison.
There you go.
Okay, Nick, I think the easy question here is, what influenced you to pick up a guitar? Like, who are your favorite artists or bands? Who was like, oh wow, like I really need to be able to do that too?
Totally. I mean, I come from a musical family, so I'm pretty lucky in that sense, I think. My uncle is a professional musician. He's now retired, but he used to live in Toronto. He's a sax player, and he toured around in the 60s and 70s with a lot of players, and so I my grandfather played organ and drums and he played in bands in like the 50s and 60s. You know, kind of that was his side hustle, right? Because he was a steel worker, and he'd, you know, work all day at the mill or all night at the mill or whatever, you know, the shift was. And then he would get off, he would go get the band, and they would all go do a wedding on a Saturday afternoon, you know, like, and that was extra money for, you know, groceries or gas or whatever it was. So that was my grandfather. My grandmother was actually a concert pianist. Wow. When her and my grandfather got together, and as the story goes, they went on their first date, and they fell in love, and 9 months later my uncle was born. But so, as was kind of back in the day, you know, because she was pregnant and because she was going to have a baby, you know, that kind of ended her career. And I think she worked a little bit maybe in those first few years, but then that was basically it. They ended up having their 4 kids, and the rest is history. But like, so I've got that musicality, and my mom, although not a performer, is always at home singing and kind of dancing as she was like cooking in the kitchen or cleaning or doing anything. There was always song present.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I really credit my mom as being my first music teacher. Like, she was singing to me like when I was in her belly, you know, before any of the days of like, you know, like Mozart for Babies, or like, you know, I think you guys have that in this. That's pretty sure that's where it came from. But there was a time, I think in the late 80s or early 90s, you could buy like these like special CD players with like specially formed speakers to put on a mom's belly
and put them on the belly.
Yeah, like right. But she would do that. She would just sit with with headphones on her belly, or like just by the stereo, and kind of have the speaker close by so that I could hear things. So I really credit her with being my first music teacher. And that music, you know, that she was listening to, she was really like a fan of like 60s folk and Motown, right? So yeah, you know, and you know, so I was listening to like a lot of Carpenters, a lot of Mamas and Papas. We have a Canadian artist, his name is Valdy, and really, really great artist. And then of course, again, Motown legends, do I even name them? But
Temptations,
you know,
baby.
yeah, and Aretha Franklin, and just like all of it. Stevie Wonder was huge in my house growing up too, and just so good. And so like that was kind of my formative years, and I wanted actually initially to be a violin player. And so I was like 3 years old. My mom got me involved with something called the Suzuki method. So she found me a teacher. And we were talking actually before kind of we officially started recording the podcast. I was actually born in Windsor, which is right across the border from Detroit. And it wasn't until I was about 8 that we moved up to Richards Landing. So my very young youth was in Windsor. So there was a big enough population that we had a school for music for youngsters, and it was the Suzuki method. So I had a Japanese man that taught me. I can't remember his name. I want to say Yoshino, but that probably isn't right. Anyway, and I was like 3 years old. I had a violin that was like this big, and I played and I would practice. And it's kind of a like a very traditional way to learn music. You don't necessarily learn to read, right? It's like play and repeat, right? So and that was interesting. And I did that until I was like 6 or 7, and I decided I kind of didn't really like practicing.
Right.
Right. I was like, I get, you know, it wasn't really worthwhile anymore. And it's funny because part of that method too is like you record your practice sessions and then you listen back to them to see where you made mistakes or what needs to be improved. And my mom still has the tapes, of course. And it was probably 15 years ago, but like I happened to put one of them in. I was like listening to this tape and I was like, wow, I was actually really good. Like, you know, and not just like really good for like a 6 or 7 year old, but like just good. Like I was a kid, obviously, but like you could hear I wasn't just like me, it's great.
Right. Like, it was like, hey, we think we got something here.
Like, yeah. So, you know, part of me kind of wishes I had continued with it, but also good that I didn't, because I probably wouldn't have found guitar. And then, you know, we moved up north and I ended up taking piano lessons when I was like 9 or 10. And I did that for about 18 months. And again, kind of took the piano, enjoyed it, got pretty, I didn't get really good. I still play keyboard today. I would never play in front of people. But like I write and compose music, so like I actually play my own piano parts and I orchestrate stuff, and then of course the computer helps with quantization and everything. But the biggest thing for me was that I always loved improvising, and I always loved like making up my own tunes. And I had this weird thing where I would read the music, but then I would embellish it. And my teacher had a major problem with this, and she was like, "You can't do that. That's not what's written on the page." And I was like, "Yeah, but it sounds good." And so,
Exactly.
yeah, and she basically said something to the effect of like, "Well, you know what? You're wasting my time and your parents' money." And so I was like, "Okay then." And I stood up, closed my book, and I left, and I never went back.
Nice. I
9
like
years
it.
old,
How
right?
old were
Like
you? How old were you?
9, 10. And I still remember my mom. "You did what?" And then I told her, and she went and had lots of words with the teacher, and then but that was the end of that. And then I
Yeah.
found guitar when I was 12. And it's funny because you look back on your life and you kind of go, there's some certain sort of pivotal moments. One of them
Mm-hmm.
for me was watching Back to the Future, the original in 1985, where Marty McFly is playing Johnny Be Good,
Mm-hmm.
right? And of course, as a kid, you don't understand that it's not actually Marty McFly, and Marty McFly isn't real. It's actually, an actor playing a guy playing guitar, and he wasn't even playing, but like that sound, that song, Chuck Berry,
Mm.
Johnny Be Good, was the first time I remember being like, man, guitar's cool.
Yeah, yeah.
I could do that. And then there were a few other sort of instances between whatever, that 5 or 6 year old boy and 12 when I found guitar. But when I was 12, Metallica came out with Metallica, the Black Album, they call it. And Enter Sandman came out. I was like, okay, that's it. I gotta play guitar. I gotta do
I
guitar.
have to.
Yeah. Like I can't not do this anymore. And that was the moment that I decided. I was like, I'm gonna be a guitar player. And I think the thing that then, so I'll wrap this story up. I know I'm talking a lot. The thing that really kind of cinched it for me was around that same year, Soundgarden had come out with an album called Super Unknown, and their guitar player, his name was Kim Thale, and they interviewed him and they asked him something about guitar, how do you come up with your solos or whatever. He's like, I don't know what I'm doing. I just make sure that I start and end on the right note, and people seem to like what I do. And I was like, huh.
Wow.
Well, if he could do that and become a rock
Yep.
star, so can I. Right?
That's amazing.
Yeah, so that was really sort of the cinch for it. And then again, as I said, like being being a youngster in Windsor, my folks or my grandparents, we would go across the border to Detroit, to like jazz bars and blues bars and stuff. And I got to hear members of the Motown band, like the house band,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
because a lot of those guys are still there, right? And there's a great documentary, if you've never seen it. It's called Standing in the Shadows of Motown.
I have not seen. I haven't watched it, but I've
Yeah, I
seen
mean it's
that.
old now because it came out in like 2003, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's all about the band that really, and when you say the band, it's actually like a collection of about like 15 or 20 guys and
Mm-hmm.
a woman as well, or a couple women. They were called the Funk Brothers. And that was really the sound of Motown. All of those records were recorded by those same musicians in that tiny little house, right? That you can still
Man,
go
that's
to.
amazing.
And
Wentzville.
so yeah, so I got to hear that music like live, or the guys playing the music, and that was all part of my formative years growing up.
So many, like you said, so many turning points where you go, well, that made a difference. Oh man, well,
Hmm.
that made a difference. That made a difference. And then you eventually make a decision that changes your
Yeah.
life. And Nick, we're glad that you became a guitar player because you've done so many amazing things. Now, I sent you the notes, and
Yep.
originally this wasn't supposed to be in there. You're supposed to have to guess.
Okay,
So
sure, yeah.
the largest concert ever.
Right. I
And
think if I'm
so that
oh sure.
number here is 3.5 million. And it
Yeah.
was Jean-Michel Jarre, I hope I'm saying that, in Moscow in 1997.
Yeah.
So I put
Although
that fact in there.
although
Go,
technically
oh,
he's
go, go.
tied. He's tied for that record with Rod Stewart, who played Copacabana Beach in Rio de Janeiro. I think it was New Year's Eve 94 or 95, something like that. Or I guess New Year's Eve would be 94 and 95. Anyway, one of those years in there, he also had 3.5. He actually has the Guinness World Record for the
Nice.
largest concert ever. But Jean-Paul, I don't know how to say
Jean-Michel.
his last name either. Jean-Michel, sorry, yeah. Uh, Jean-Michel Jarre, probably. But anyway,
We'll go for it.
um, either way, he also, yeah, that 3.5 million out in Moscow. Hey, crazy. Can you imagine?
That's okay. I'm glad you said that because I want you to take us to a moment where, because you've toured all around the world,
Yeah.
many different countries, take us to a moment where you look out and you go, wow, like either like, oh crap, this is a lot of people,
Yeah.
or wow, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I get to do this for a living. Take us to one of those experiences.
Well, I could do both. The first one is
All
actually the
right.
second one. So I'll do the that one first. And this is gonna sound trite, but like literally anytime I get on stage and there is anybody there to listen to me, I feel like I'm the luckiest guy in the world. Because
I love it.
if you know who I am, amazing. But B, even if you didn't, if you just like, let's say you paid your $5 to get in the door at like your local pub or something, and I happen to be doing a blues night or a jazz thing or hosting a jam or whatever, you still paid your hard-earned money to come and listen to me play music. Wow. Okay. Totally thankful. Because I still feel like I'm just that little guy growing up in Northern Ontario in my bedroom. Like, why would anybody pay to listen to me?
Right.
So that's
Right.
the first answer. Which I know, like I said, it sounds like super cheesy, but it's true. Like I feel like especially nowadays, there's like this sense of this can sound like old man yells at clouds, right? But I feel like there's a sense among young musicians now where it's like because the internet is so accessible and we have everything in our pocket and
Mm-hmm.
it's possible to film yourself playing on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, whatever, and have it blow up and you could just go crazy overnight. Those kinds of things are getting few and farther between now. But there is still this sense, I think, of like entitlement of like I can just get good at my craft, make a single video and blow up, right?
Right.
Where I think
They don't
people
respect the
forget,
grind.
yeah, like they just forget that there's grind and they forget that it's melody, it's about connecting with people, right? And making those connections, making those friendships, making the people feel something,
Mm.
and feeling lucky that you get to do it. One of my professors at school once said to me, he's like, you know what, Nick, a bad day playing music is better than a good day doing anything else. And I'm like, fair enough, you know,
Shout out to the
because
professor.
yeah, because like if you think about it, like okay, so what is the worst thing that could possibly happen for a bad day as a musician? Like you're playing on stage and maybe a string breaks, or you get booked to play a gig and like three people show up, right? So you're playing to like a dead room, right? Or you get up and you just, I don't know, you got an earache and you're feeling under the weather and everything you play
Mm.
is off and you're out of key and whatever. Well, you probably will still get paid. You'll definitely get to go home at the end of the day and you get to learn from that mistake and get better and do it again tomorrow.
Right.
What's the worst that can happen if you're a tower rigger,
Uh-oh.
right? You climb up that tower and there's a lightning storm and you die. Like it's just music, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it ain't that bad. Um and then yeah, so the other thing, let's see. I was lucky in I mean, I played a lot of really big shows, but like one of the very first ones I ever played was this thing called Bayfest in
Mm-hmm.
Sarnia. Again, Ontario, and I was playing with a Canadian country artist at the time, and we were opening for I can't remember the exact order, but we were opening for Gretchen Wilson, who's like a big country star,
Okay.
or
Okay.
was. She's still pretty big. And I can't remember if it was that day or the next day was like the big act was Bare Naked Ladies, who was like in
Oh,
Canada,
okay.
they're
Yeah.
like, whoa, it's the Bare Naked Ladies. Like they're huge, right? But I remember stepping out on that stage and there were probably like 40,000 people. And that was like the first time I'd ever played a crowd that big. Like I'd
Yeah.
played, you know, you play bar gigs, maybe 100, 200 people. You play like a theater show. Like I did Broadway Cross Canada for a while, which was fun. And you know, you're paying 1,500 seat, 1,800 seat theaters. Like it's nothing crazy, right? It's like the Fox in
Yeah.
Detroit. Like
Yeah.
beautiful venue, sounds great, but like, you know, it's not that big. So yeah, 40,000 people, open air venue, big, like you hit a chord and it just like echoes.
Down.
Yeah. And you're just like, wow, this is, and you get a sense of like, okay, don't get up, don't muck it up. Sorry. Um, so yeah, that moment was definitely one of those moments. But the interesting thing is, for me anyway, was that it only ever happened the once.
Mm.
I had that first experience of that size of a crowd, and I went, whew, and it really hit me. Like, it just washed over me. And once you play that first song and finished and the crowd goes nuts, or
You're
even
like,
half the
okay, I
crowd
got this.
reacts, you're like, exactly, yeah, okay, I got this. It's all right. I know what I'm doing. And
That makes sense. That makes
yeah,
sense. I think I've mentioned this so many times, but I sing at my church on Sundays,
yeah,
and it's nothing like kind of getting up there. And I don't want to say like I am kind of nervous every Sunday, no matter how many people are
sure.
there, because it's you're still performing, right? This
Yeah,
is still a
totally.
craft that you have to hone in, and there's
Yeah,
still practice and work and time that goes into it. And you're like, okay, here we go, like here we go. But
yeah,
again, like you, like once that the first note or whatever is
yeah,
played and the lights come on, and I just go for it. It's like, okay, yeah, all right, I know what I'm doing. I've been here before. I've done this. And real quick story, I haven't told
yeah,
this one before, but at my church, we used to do like plays, for Easter and that kind of stuff. And so when I lived in China, we became a part of a church there, and they had
yeah,
like this. Now, this was like a huge, like a massive church. I mean, hundreds of people, I'm thinking, yeah.
sure.
And I think Easter came around and I put something together.
Yeah.
Uh, I forgot what the name of it was, but I was like, it was like a mock interview, like a 60 minutes thing. I think I was like
Okay.
interviewing like Mary, and then I would interview Peter.
Yeah.
It was kind of like one of those, right?
Yeah.
Not a parody because it wasn't like funny, but
No,
it
of
was
course,
kind of a
but
mock of it. And so I step out there, and it's way more people than I've ever done
yeah.
anything for. I mean, I'm, hundreds of people, and I'm like, okay, all right. Yeah, it's a lot of people out there.
Yeah.
And it hits you. And so, but when I started and I prepared, and once I opened up, I was like, okay, all right, I'm ready for this. I prepared for this. So I can relate just a little bit. It wasn't 40,000
Yeah.
people, but the feeling of, oh crap, you better not mess this up.
Yeah, totally. There's an interesting book. There's actually a whole series of them. It's called The Inner Game of Music.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually written by a psychologist, I think in the late 80s, early 90s. And he's got a whole series. It's like the inner game of tennis, the inner game of skiing, the inner game of something or other. And he really developed this sort of system to help coach and psychologically tweak high performance athletes.
Yeah.
And so he realized that the same kind of methodologies and teachings and inner realizations, if you want to call it that, can be applied
Mm-hmm.
to music and musicians, because if you're playing at that level, it's very similar, especially in the world of classical music. When I play electric guitar, it's like I move this much of my arm and my finger, like it's not that bad. But like if you're playing cello, man, you're like it's
Right.
a sport. Um, so he developed these same sort of techniques to help coach these high performance musicians. And I read
Mm.
that when I was in my 20s, and it really changed my perspective on a lot of things, because if you can realize that you're putting in the practice now, like practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes
Right.
permanent. So you
Okay.
put in the
Okay.
time now, make sure that you're practicing perfectly. And
There you
if you
go.
put in enough practice, you put in enough hours, all you have to do is just get up on stage and let your body do what it needs to do. Like do what it knows already how to do. Shut your brain off, and you kind of, there's many different ways you can call it, flow state or liminal state or whatever else. But like you can kind of almost, it's weird. It's not like a dissociation, but it's almost a little bit of that. You can step out of yourself and go, all right, cool. My body knows what it's doing. Don't overthink this. And
Yeah.
then you can actually enjoy the moment a bit more. But
Mm.
anyway, point being, I would highly recommend that book if you're interested. And again, as you mentioned, you sing every Sunday at your church. So, which by the way,
Yep.
shout out to church musicians. Some of the best musicians I've ever played with are church musicians, man, because it's like stylistically kind of all over the place. Like I've met them and they do like rock, gospel, blues, hip hop, country, like, and all sometimes within the exact same service. They're playing like 8
Yeah.
different tunes, and every single one is a different style. It's good
Man, and
stuff.
you talked about improv earlier. Like,
Yeah,
I mean, if you can't, well, I can't say that because a lot of churches, they don't have like this improv element. But
sure. Yeah,
let's just say like the black churches, the ones that I go to and have grown up in,
yeah,
you better be able to just roll, and
Yeah.
that music is going to start. And I guess whoever the leader is, usually the person that's on the keyboard, they
Yep.
might hear something or feel something, and then they start playing.
Yeah.
And then they're in their talk back, and they're telling their drummer, and they're telling the guys like, okay,
Yeah.
this is where we're going, go here and then go here. And then as the singers, right, you have to be able to then feel and hear the same thing to then be able to just start
Yeah.
singing. What are the next words that are coming? And then now you got to tell that to all of the people who you're singing with. And it's
Yeah,
only
totally.
like 6 of us on stage.
Yeah.
So like if one person is not on the right page, like it's gonna be noticeable. So
Yeah.
that's the fun part, and the camaraderie of
Yeah.
just being in the band and playing and the practice, and you get on there and you're like, okay, is everything that we did, is it going to work? And can we put it together at the right time in the big moments? And then once those improv parts come, have we done enough together to be able to now flow into what's next? And can we read each other? That's super fun stuff.
And that's teamwork,
all day.
right?
Yep.
Again, there's a lot of, I don't think it gets quite enough credit, but like, especially playing in a band, and the more members you add, the more complex it gets. But there's a lot of similarity between playing in a band, live improvisation, and sports, because it's a lot of the same cues you have to look and read and understand the situation and reaction and interaction. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. And as you said, it's camaraderie, right?
Man,
and music is so good too, because it's like, let's face it, I'm very lucky. I grew up, I come from a pretty privileged place, but Canada, I think, is a little bit different than the States, but we're not that far removed. You know what I mean? But I always grew up with the knowledge and what my parents instilled in me was like, everybody is equal, and like everybody has something interesting to contribute. And the thing about sports is that, like, so obviously it's kind of usually delineated male and female, and then you get your good athletes and your kind of medium grade, and then the low grade, and then what. And if you're not at that kind of level, it's like, no, you're not playing. But like music, especially in like a church situation or like in a jam situation or an improv or whatever, it's like you just show up. You can take part, and even if you're not at my level, that's okay. I can help you through it, or I can make you look good. And I feel like there's always something interesting to be contributed by anybody at any level, and it doesn't matter, age, race, color, anything. And I think music is the great equalizer of society. And I feel like it's a major disservice over the past 20 years. I mean, it's been happening a lot longer than that, but really over the last 20 years, where music education and arts education, creativity, like, drama, like all the arts, the creative arts. The funding, and I think it's especially bad in the States, but like that funding has been eroded and taken away more and more and more, with focus on, like, I don't know, whatever you guys are focusing on, right? Not you guys, but I mean, but whatever the establishment decides is important of the day. And it's really too bad.
I agree. And so you're a musician, and you've toured and you've written music, but there are tons of ways you as a guitarist have found different ways to make money.
Totally. You have to.
And so our next number here is November 29th, 2011.
Yeah.
Which is when your YouTube channel was created. Now, I know you do more things than just that, but talk about like some different ways that you learned how to make money. You started teaching music. You've done a bunch of different stuff outside of just touring with a band. So talk about some of those.
Totally. So it's interesting that you mentioned about you said November 29th, 2011.
That's what's on your YouTube page.
That's what's on the YouTube.
So that's what I put.
So that's actually the birth of that YouTube. I've been on YouTube since 2006.
Wow.
So like when it first rolled out, I was like, wow, this is going to be huge. Sorry, a bit of a side story, but like I originally made that channel when I went to Japan. And shortly thereafter met my wife, and we started working together and doing YouTube together, and we got pretty big. We blew up. Like at that time you could video your cat farting, and you'd get 1.5 million hits, right? But like we were making content about like, here's our life in Japan and this is really interesting and check this out and here's the train and like just whatever. But we actually had like, I don't know, 60,000 followers or something, and it kind of blew up.
Right.
And that first wave of monetization that happened in like 2007, 2008, I was actually part of that. So we actually were starting to make some money with YouTube, which was really cool.
Nice.
And then subsequently we had to shut down the channel because we had some bizarre situation where this guy kind of got obsessed with us and just like, it was like, all right, we'll stop that now. But to your point about being a musician and making money with more than just touring, and I think it's especially important right now because of the past couple of years that we've had with the illness and the great pandemic and the whatever. I was always under the impression of like, gigging is cool, gigging is great, you can make a lot of money, and you can, especially when you get into like a real top tier tour. Most musicians are probably playing at a more local level or even a more like B or C level. I hate to do that tiered system, but I mean, it does happen.
Is what it
like
is.
National touring act, regional touring act, local gigging act, local bar band or corporate band, like that kind of thing. So, but I always was like, okay, well, I'm not going to be young forever. And, you know, I don't look like Justin Bieber or Christina Aguilera or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not, you know, I'm okay with it. I am who I am. But I was always thinking like, okay, well, I'm not going to be young forever. And as we know, as you age, performance tends to suffer, right? So like, I'm not going to be able to keep playing at the level that I was. So I was always interested in diversifying of like, okay, well, can I teach? Can I do something else? How can I augment my income in a way? And then also I was thinking, okay, like, well, if something happens, like I fall and break a leg, or if I fall and break an arm, or if I do something stupid and get my hand caught in a rototiller or something, you know, how else will I have money coming in? And so again, luckily, you know, I had the chance to go to school, networked with a lot of really cool people, a lot of amazing players. And that opened my eyes up to a lot of possibilities outside of just gigging and touring. One of which obviously is YouTube. Why not? You can get on there and I'm not going to lie, it is a lot of work. It is a lot of work.
Tell me about it.
You know, the channel that I have now started in 2011. I kind of made some videos and what would be like I one-cheeked it. Right, to put it in a G-rated fashion, right? A half butted.
There you go.
Right.
There you go.
So it was I didn't put my whole bum. I didn't put my whole bum in, just one cheek. And I was busy doing other things, and it kind of languished. It didn't really do a whole lot. 2018 kind of came around, which thankfully was before the pandemic. But then I started really doubling down. But like over that entire time, sometimes, and especially in the last year and a half, it's like 50, 60, 70-hour weeks where you're filming and you're writing and you're editing and you're, you know, looking for new trends and what value can I bring to my audience. And I don't make a dime off of YouTube. Right. So it's hard work for not a lot of you know, accolade or money. Yep. But here's the key. You use the YouTube, or at least I do, for a lead generation system where people can find me and see me and take a lesson or whatever. And they go, oh, that's interesting. I like this Nick guy. I like his teaching style. And then they'll funnel off to my website, and then I can teach
where
them
can
a
I find
lesson,
more?
right? Or I can sell them a course, or I can sell them a book, or they can buy a t-shirt or a hat to support me, you know, like that kind of thing. So the YouTube video itself, like I'm not getting any AdSense revenue, but I do actually gain customers and followers and students through that. Because I look at YouTube as like, this is my my advertising, right? Yep. You're from Detroit, right? 29 or 250, right? Mr. Allen. Do you remember the Mr. Allen ads? Or is that too far before your time?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Gardner White Furniture. I mean, all the ads, man. Yeah.
But that's the way I look at YouTube, is like, it's a great source of advertising because it is the number 2 search engine in the world, Google being number 1 and YouTube being number 2. And the interesting thing, if people Google something, chances are they're actually going to get a YouTube video as their first answer anyway. So there's always been that. And then I've always looked at, or not always, but, you know, as I said, teaching. I feel like most musicians already know this. Like, teaching is a great way to make a side income or even a full-time income as a musician. And I've done that pretty much through my entire career as a musician. I've always had students. I've had, folks doing exam prep. I've had high school students. I've had young. I've had old, whatever. Around 2009, 2010, Lisa and I were getting ready to move back to Canada from Japan, and I didn't really want to be touring. I didn't want to be on the road. I didn't want to kind of do that anymore because I got to a point anyway where it was like, okay, I'm a little, I don't know, I was burned out.
Right.
And you get to a point too where it's like, I don't want to be away from home that long. I don't want to be away from her that long.
Yep.
Loading and unloading gear, like just it's all of it. It's hard on the body.
The hassle that comes along with it.
Yeah, it's a sacrifice, to get out and do that. So I'm like, okay, well, how can I still make music and not necessarily teach full time, because I didn't want to go in and like have to work nights and weekends, because that's really, if you want to make a full-time living as a music teacher, you're usually at a local music store and you're teaching Monday to Friday, 5:30 to 9 p.m. and then like all day Saturday
after school.
Right? Yeah. But I, again, through my network and kind of talking to some of my friends, it was like, okay, well, why don't you start pitching your music for music libraries or to, placement agents or music supervisors for film and TV? And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. And I mean, the golden, I always say this, the golden goose, or like the highest pinnacle that you can think of, right? Like, what's one of the most famous TV shows of all time is Friends, right? Think about the 2 or 3 guys that wrote the theme song for that song. They are multimillionaires.
That's it. They're good to go.
35 seconds of music, right? It's actually a whole song because they were a band, but like that 35 seconds, like that's it. Their careers are made. So that's kind of the goal. But if you think about that in terms of a musician, okay, well, I could write a piece of music that could be used in a TV show like that, or any TV show, right? Or a commercial, or a jingle, or a radio spot, or whatever. I can do work once and get paid multiple times for it. This is what we call passive income. I hate that word, passive income, because there's no such thing.
It's a thing right now.
It is a thing right now. But it really is. Like, you do work once, you get it placed, and as long as that show remains in syndication, every time it gets aired, I get, 25 cents, 60 cents, $1.25, like whatever it happens to be.
Right.
And I get payouts on that. Like, I'm still making money on stuff I wrote in 2009.
Nice.
Right? Which is great. Now, at this point, it's not very much. Like, those particular pieces really only make me, I don't know, $50 a year or something like that, because they're not shown on TV that much anymore. But the point remains the same, is like, you do that work once and then you can multiply it a lot. So that's one of the ways that I found. And then again, through my teaching, I always was one of those guys where I primarily self-taught as a guitar player. And then I went to school. I kind of have this sort of interesting hybrid approach to teaching and learning. And I think it really should be individualized to students. But if you're going to put a system together, here's how I do it. But I'd be teaching and I would put together like a reading list for my students and I'd give it to the parents, right? And they'd look at me, they're like, this is $600 worth of books. And I'm like, yeah, but like, we need, page 4 from this book, page 22 to 26 from this book. This book, we're going to use the reference charts, blah, 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 blah. And they're like, well, can't you just give us a book that has everything?
All the stuff in it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, well, but it doesn't exist. And so it was always in the back of my mind. I'm like, okay, well, one of these days I'm going to make the book that I want to have to teach students from. And 2020 came along, and of course that stopped any sort of gigging. Productions were shut down. Like, I had a bunch of contracts that were in the works, and everything just was like completely like obliterated, like overnight. And of course everybody was affected by this, not just me. But it was like, okay, well, you know what? Now's the time. If I'm not going to write a book, if I'm ever going to write a book, now is the time to do it. So I put my head down, wrote a book. I wrote 3 books, and I still have maybe 2 more in me. But put them out on Amazon. So I self-published, and one of them, did amazingly well for me. It was like April, May, June of 2021. So last year was a number 1 bestseller in the music instruction category on Amazon, which is fantastic. And it still does phenomenally well. My other book, which is Basic Music Theory for Guitarists, also does okay. Like, it does good. Does well, but it's not as well as the other one, which is very, very specific. It's called Fretboard Memory Magic, and it's just a real simple system for memorizing the
That's
fretboard.
a great title, by the way.
Thank you. I'm pretty proud of it. It's like hooky and catchy. Like, it's almost like clickbait, but it actually does what it says it's going to do. Like, if you buy the book, like it's like magic. So that's the big one, and then the other one is still does well, but like not quite as well. It's like I don't know, it's about a 60-40 split in terms of royalties, like, month to month. Sorry, I realized I talked for a long time.
No, that's great. That's great. That's awesome. Hey, we love the stories, right? We
Yeah.
love to get into the details. I love it. But you mentioned Japan a few times and how you met your wife there. So that's like our
Yeah.
next number. You spent 5 years in Japan.
Yeah.
Um, I heard you talk about expat communities on another podcast. I was like, man, yes,
Yeah.
because I lived in China for a year,
Yeah.
obviously not 5 years, but when
Sure.
you find those communities, it's very different. Even though you try to hang out with locals, and some of them are inside of the expat community where they've kind of been integrated in through some way.
Yeah.
But talk about what made you want to come back. What was the experience, or when did you go, you know what, time to get back home, time to start making my way back to the States,
Yeah.
but not to the States, but
Well,
to
to North
Canada
America.
for good.
Yeah. The States light, I think, is
There you go.
the way somebody said Canada was once. There was like, it's it's like Diet Coke, just 1 calorie, not quite Coca-Cola enough. Um, Thank you, Austin Powers, right? But it was not ever any one thing specifically.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of just a bunch of things happening all at the same time. My wife and I had been together for we weren't actually married at that point. We got married the summer that we decided to move back. But her mother was in poor health, and
Mm.
so we weren't sure kind of how long she was very
Right,
worried about
right.
her mom. So there was that happening. We were both our contracts with the companies that we had been working for in Japan were coming to an end. So we were not sure if we were either going to be re-signed again for another year
Mm-hmm,
or two
mm-hmm.
years or whatever. And even if they did, were we going to get any more money, or was it going to be some bonus or like whatever? So there was that happening. The big sort of 2008 financial crisis was kind of like finally coming to an
Oh
end,
yeah.
and things were sort of turning back up around the world. So we thought, okay, well, no, now wouldn't be a bad time to go back.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we were both getting sick isn't the right word, but like I mean, you lived in China, right? So there's a there's kind of a grind when you live overseas and you aren't part of that culture. And so in the States, there's the term OG, right?
Yeah.
So in Japan, that it's funny because it's kind of they use a lot of like English words, but they as Japanese, I'm sure you've seen like the writing that doesn't look like Chinese characters. It's more like weird angular stuff. So they call it katakana. Anyway, so OG in Japan means obvious gaijin, which is an obvious outsider. So it would be like me. I'm a
Ah.
white man. You're a black man. My wife, a white woman. Anybody that doesn't look Japanese. So
Oh
some
geez.
Chinese folks, like we had some friends that are Chinese and Korean. They are non-obvious gaijin, right? So they fit in. They look like Japanese people, but they're not, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but life as an OG in Japan can be very difficult. It's there's a lot of staring. There's a lot of
Yeah.
uh, you know, mothers with their children's moving to the other side of the train when you get on, and so that kind of thing tends to grate on you a little bit. And these are isolated incidents. It's not like every day somebody was like pointing at me going, "Oh my God, scary white man!" Like it wasn't anything like that. But little things piled up over time. It kind of gets to
Mm-hmm,
you.
mm-hmm.
And then there's a lot of rules there and things that just like as a foreigner, you're not, at that time things have changed. But as a foreigner at that time, you weren't allowed to own property. So like we could never buy a house.
Right.
You can even if you become a naturalized citizen, you're still not allowed to vote. So like a lot of things that as Canadians we take for granted, we weren't going to ever be able to realize in that country. And again, just kind of cultural differences, language barrier.
Yeah.
My wife is quite fluent. I'm not. I got I spoke enough Japanese that I could get into trouble. And it was just kind of a combination of all these factors that it was just like, you know what,
Yeah.
it's time to go home, and that's what led us to come back in 2010. But I don't want it to sound like we had a horrible experience there. Like, we loved Japan. We love Japan. We still have friends there. We were actually planning to go back for our 10-year wedding anniversary in 2020.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you know,
Things happen.
the illness happened, so that prevented it from happening. But we'll get back again, because it's a beautiful country. And, you know, China, we actually never made it to mainland China, but we did visit Hong Kong and we visited Taiwan, which, of course, obviously are very different places.
Oh,
But
man. Oh,
there's
man.
so much to visit in Asia in such a small, like, you can hop
Yes.
in a plane and it's like, you know, a 20-minute plane ride for like $100, and you're
Yep.
in a completely new country with a completely different culture and different food and like exciting art and stuff. And yeah, it was a really cool
It's
place
amazing.
to live. Yeah.
It's amazing because like the countries that we live in are so huge. So
Yeah.
an hour from here, I'm still like in Houston,
Texas.
basically.
Yeah, right.
Because it's so big, and I could, you know, travel for 2 or 3 hours on the plane and still be in Texas.
Yeah.
As opposed to there, you know, Hong Kong is very close, Japan is very close, you know,
Yeah.
Malaysia, Thailand, all these places are
Yeah.
very close together, very easy to get to.
Mm.
So as we come to a close here, Nick, I do my 3 whats.
Okay.
And so I'll ask you these questions. You can take them as far out or as close in as you want to.
Okay.
First one is, in your field or outside of it, what's an opinion that you have that will be considered unpopular?
Oh, I can tell you right off the top of my head. So it's 2 parts. Number 1,
All right.
theory is not necessary to be a good musician. Number 2, this is part of that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is really specific to guitarists, and I take a lot of flack for this online because everybody online is an expert at everything. And I'm like, so this is the thing. I'm not hard and fast on anything. I'm just like, look, this is my opinion. This is the way I see it. And
Yeah.
I would never stop anybody from learning theory. Like, that's not to say it's not important. I just don't think it's necessary for most people. But anyway, the second part of that is that, and again, this is very specific to music and music education, but the circle of fifths is not something you should spend any time learning as a guitar player. You are never going to use it. So
You heard it here first.
Yeah, there you go. And people give me a hard time for it. Like I said, it's an opinion. It is what it is. There are several other music educators, guitar educators, specific educators online that agree with me. And you know, we're part of maybe a slightly different breed than the norm. But you know, it's weird. I feel like, again, it's like this weird indoctrination that's happened with this like 18th or 17th century German high classical music that's like gotten into the culture of like, this is what music is, this is what music theory is, this is how you
can't get away from it.
Yeah, and it's like, why am I studying 17th century harpsichord harmony for wanting to play, you know, wanting to play rock guitar in 2021? Like, it does not. It doesn't work. Of course, there are things that carry over, but like, we need a new vocabulary. And there's some really, really cool stuff. If you get some time, there's a really great interview that Adam Neely does, and I can't remember the man's name right now. Adam Neely has a really huge YouTube channel. He's like a musicologist. And he interviews a professor, like a very like master's PhD, like smart dude, world-renowned musicologist, specifically on this topic about like, we need new vocabulary to talk about modern music and the way that jazz and blues and, you know, things that have evolved in 2021 that are so different from the 350 years ago. And it's crazy. If you take the US it's like the AP music exam, there are questions on figured bass, which, if you're unfamiliar, again, 17th century German classical composition thing, it has been out of style, like not even in classical circles, for over 300 years. Why are we teaching this to high school students in 2021?
I mean, there's a lot of areas, and I talked about this with a previous guest, where it's just so lazy. We're outdated in a lot of things, you know, education, you know, music, political system, a lot of
it's
different
not just
things.
the US though, right? This music education specifically, it's like Canada's the same, UK, Europe, we're all in this like weird and honest, and I don't want to, that's a whole other type of podcast, I think, but
Oh yeah.
it's like, it's among many other things, it's socioeconomic control, it is classism and racism. Let's be completely honest, right? If we control what you learn and how you learn it, certain people can't get into the inner circle.
Yeah.
But music is supposed
Doors
to be
stay
for
closed.
everybody.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Man.
Like I said, that's a whole other thing. And
yeah, that we could have went way off the deep end. Okay,
Yeah.
here we go. Second what?
Okay.
If you weren't in music, what field would you be in?
Oh man.
Yeah, that's probably tough. You've been doing this basically your entire life.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had other jobs in between. I've worked in a few other industries, because again, being a musician, sometimes there aren't gigs there. You know what I mean? Like I've done a lot of not very nice jobs. You know, like I've cleaned carpets. I've to be colloquial, I don't know what you guys would call it in the States, but we call it a honey wagon. So you basically drive a vacuum truck around to like porta potties and like suck them out.
Oh,
Yeah. Like, but I mean, sometimes, man,
Man.
you got to do something to pay the mortgage, right? So
oh
you
yeah.
go to work.
You got to figure it out.
Yeah. And, you know, as a younger man, I would do whatever. Like I, worked on the railroad. I shoveled gravel, right? So, anyway, if I wasn't a musician, I guess I'd be dead. No. No. Yeah.
That's not funny.
No. But I honestly, it goes back to being a little boy again. I always wanted to be an astronaut. And
Ooh, okay.
I suppose if I had a slightly different brain and my particular personality had allowed me to focus more on math and engineering and science, I probably would have been an astronaut, or at the very minimum, like a pilot or something, right? Just having just watched Maverick, right? The new Top Gun movie. I don't know if you've seen it, but like I grew up with the original Top Gun, and like, man, what a great movie. Like I would have, that's probably where I would have gone. I would have like gone into the military to try and be a pilot, and then eventually move on to like, NASA, or in Canada, we have the Canadian Space Agency, but yeah.
Okay. That's my first astronaut reference on the podcast. So that's awesome.
Cool.
And last what, before we get out of here, what advice would you give to someone in high school? So if I take this back to my classroom and I'm like, hey guys, I got this amazing musician. His name is Nick Morrison. He has some advice for you.
Totally.
What would you say to those kids?
So can I ask a clarifying question?
Go for it.
So advice for high school kids, like what age group?
Well, I teach freshmen all the way to seniors. So you can tailor it however you want to.
The reason I ask is because I feel like there's such a growth curve that changes between freshman to senior.
That's an entirely different podcast.
Yeah.
Let's go with seniors, people who are kind of getting out and getting
out into the world. The thing that I would say, and this is going to sound super, I feel like lots of people have said this, but like, you've got time, right? Or some version of it. I heard a great podcast a little while ago with Tom Hanks and Robert De Niro, and who else was on it? Somebody else was on it. Doesn't matter. Anyway.
Was it the Actors Roundtable? Like one of those?
I think it was one of those.
Those are awesome, by the way.
And it was the same kind of thing, right? It was like, what advice would you have? And Tom Hanks, normally, and this is going to maybe sound bad, but normally I feel like for the most part, actors are paid to be beautiful and say things that other people write. Things that other people write. I find most actors to not really be super very interesting people. They lead interesting lives, but they're not necessarily interesting people. But Tom Hanks said a version of this, and it was like, this too shall pass.
Yep. I think that was, I think I seen the same one.
Yeah. And Bobby De Niro kind of came in and added good and bad. Because I think we have this innate ability as humans, and I think it's what's helped us survive and helped us grow and helped us evolve over time, of like, this too shall pass, thinking about all the bad stuff, right? Like, oh, I'm in a bad situation right now, I'm broke, or I'm going through a divorce, or I was in a car accident, or
Yep.
whatever, right? Or I got to drive a honey wagon for 6 months to make rent. This too shall pass.
Mm-hmm.
But also not forgetting that on the flip side, good things will also pass, right? You're at the top right now. You're making more money than you've ever made in your life. Everybody loves you. Tomorrow something could happen and it's all going to be gone.
Yeah.
And I think from that is what I'm taking away, is that you've got time, means that as a young person, and it's funny because, like, again, this is like old man yells at clouds, right? Because if I had given this advice to myself when I was in high school,
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have listened, right? But the thing that you don't realize, I think, when you are 18, 19, is that you have a long time to go, and things seem really dire or important or hard or whatever it is
Urgent.
for this. Like for this one small period of your life. But like in the grand scheme of things, it's nothing. And you got a long time to figure it out. I'm 42.
Man.
I'm still figuring it out.
Man, I mean, I didn't
You know?
start my podcast like a year ago. I'm 33, right?
Yeah.
I didn't become a teacher till I think 28.
Okay.
Right. So, this is still really young.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, yeah. And I mean, you think about it, right? 42, my life expectancy, I think in Canada, we're like men are 60 or 76, 77, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I still have like half my life to go.
I mean, theoretically, I mean, we know people who live into their 90s. Right?
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
could have another 50 years left.
Yep. Another 60 even. My great grandfather lived to be 103.
See, look at that. So
Right?
you go for at least 90.
This is what I'm saying. I still got all my hair. Like, I'm doing good.
Okay, Nick, I think that's an excellent spot to end it. But before we do, I want you to tell people where they can find you, talk about your YouTube, your app, your website, plug it all.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Nick Morrison. You can find me at www.guitardojo.ca. If you are an intermediate guitar player looking to improve your skills without stress, without jargon of music theory, and just want to learn applicable stuff to make your guitar playing better, come check me out, guitardojo.ca. I got a free download on there. You can get access into my app for free and take my free 15-minute lesson to get you soloing and learn the guitar neck faster than you ever thought possible. So go check that out. And you can find me on YouTube if you're just interested in just free lessons. I put out like licks and song analysis and all sorts of different cool stuff on YouTube. It's youtube.com/samuraifingers. And that actually translates across all of my social media. So I'm at Samurai Fingers on Instagram, on TikTok, and on YouTube, and at Twitter as well.
So Nick, Samurai Fingers, whatever you call them, you know what? I'm thankful. I'm grateful for this conversation. It was awesome. And make sure you guys go follow Nick, go find Nick, go watch his videos, download the app, go buy the books. If you're an aspiring guitarist, make sure you check out all the things that Nick has to offer. He has so much great experience, and he's just an all-out fun guy. This is a great interview.
I really appreciate you having me, and it's always nice to talk to other people that are both in music and outside of music, but music appreciators, which is always good, and of course always nice to have a platform to share my experiences, my expertise, and that sort of thing. So thank you very much, and thanks for listeners that have listened in. It's been a pleasure.
Well, signing off for the amazing Nick Morrison, I am your host, Tony Rambles, for the Living Numbers podcast. Make sure you guys go like, subscribe, go follow the YouTube channel, follow me on Anchor, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. Make sure you guys go ahead and like and share, rate, review, all that great stuff. And I will see you all in the next round. Boom, I think we got it.
Nice.